What's going on, everyone? It's Mitch from RespectMyRegion.com coming back with another episode of the Morning Joint on this Monday morning, joined by co-host Dani WestCoast. How are you living today, Dani?
Good morning, everyone. I'm doing great, actually. It is the last week of January, the very last week of the first month of the year. So I hope it's been a great month for you guys, settling back into things. But hey, Monday morning, let's get it.
And it's so cliche because I used to work, I was saying right before this, I used to work in like a traditional office. I remember every time at the start of the year, everybody's like, oh, I can't believe the first month of the year is over. And it used to irk me because I'm like, bro, why does everyone say this every year? But here I am sitting here thinking like, damn, I can't believe we're already 30 days into this year, man. It's crazy to think about. 1/12 of the way down.
Yep. 12 more or 11 more months to go. So
Yeah.
gotta count.
Yeah, most certainly, and that's it's a new year, and we're seeing obviously cannabis legalization spread. Some things are starting to open up, and so our first topic of the day, we have the first two recreational legal New York City dispensaries are now open. Housing Works and Smacked Village are now open. Kind of unique names. I like the branding. Not really rooted in kind of we watch the West Coast, right? Come over, it's a lot of something patient care, compassionate care, remedies, right? You see a lot of these medical terms transferred over in those early California days of those first dispensaries, and Washington and Oregon as well. New York, we're definitely seeing dispensaries come out kind of fully branded as a dispensary and not like this glimpse of yesteryear of these medical markets. But it's kind of cool what they're doing with these first couple shops being opened up as social equity licenses. I don't know how privy you have to all that. I'm not super hip to all the details, but I think the first 30 locations in New York are going to be social equity only. They're going to get the first licenses, and I think they also get a window where there's kind of a non-compete with non-social equity. I'm not too hip to all that. But it's kind of a cool program they have rolling out. We'll see if it's cool, or we'll see if they fumble the rock like legislators have done everywhere else.
Totally. I do agree with that. The name Housing Works is very interesting to me. It seems like it would have a little bit more to kind of do obviously with housing, and then it's interesting that Smacked Village is coming from the first ex-convict owned adult use dispensary. Now I find this really, really interesting. In the article, it does explain that Housing Works for some reason doesn't have concentrates available there. It does have vape pens, pre-rolls, edibles, and things like that, but the lack of concentrates. The reason I mention this is because New York, come on, like you're allowing the illicit market to just thrive like crazy over there, and it seems like it's not going to get much better. So thank God these social equity dispensaries are going to have the non-compete with at least legal ones, because this illicit market is just totally out of hand in New York. I wonder how these businesses are going to compete.
Yeah, I think we're talking about that a little bit before we went live. I think when you first go legal, there's excitement, right? And I think it's everyone, even people on the other side of the market. I remember when weed first went legal in Washington, recreational legal. It took me a long time to not shop in the black market and shop in the dispensary for my go-to. But definitely when it first went live, I definitely went. I wasn't standing in line because that's just not who I am as a person. I'm not standing in line for Jordans or anything. Not that I'm too cool. I just don't really like waiting, But I remember going and buying some joints and buying some legal weed and just being like, this is, I can't believe this. The shit was trash. I felt like I overpaid. And like I said, I was definitely still smoking on the black market for a while, but it was still, the experience was, wow, this is really cool. I honestly never pictured this, never saw this, really come into fruition, being a longtime cannabis consumer. And so it was just an interesting experience. And then obviously you have the people who haven't smoked weed, right? I remember like my, your parents' friends, right? Who like, I hadn't smoked weed since the 70s, but it's legal now. So now I have no qualms with it, right? Going and buying joints and stuff. And it's like, I think you'll see these first couple dispensaries thrive regardless of their selection, pricing, or quality. You'll see them thrive. But as that competition comes up where there's more dispensaries, popping up and there's more products available, then obviously then it's going to start coming to like, okay, who has the best? Okay, who has the best for the least? Who has the best, best quality? Who has the best deals? The best quality for the best deals. And you and I both know if we're talking best quality for best deals, black market's going to win that battle. 9.9 out of 10 times. And sadly, in some of these new states, the black market's also just going to win on best quality. Until the legal market gets their shit together.
Right.
I did think it was interesting though, the smacked village, because the legislations and the regulations around like branding and naming, they seemed when it first came out in New York, it seemed almost like at face value that cookies wouldn't apply, like the bubble letters, just this branding. They didn't want certain words. So it was interesting to see that the word smacked was kind of, I guess, approved by them, especially as one of the first ones. I have no issues with it, but just in reading the legislation and seeing that kind of stood out to me. But it's, I don't know. It's still interesting to see. We'll see where this is going to go. I think New York is such a big city. We're going to see a lot of branding at a very high level, a lot of celebrity, a lot of big media influence, potentially more than we even see out of Los Angeles. I know a lot of movies and TV are filmed out there, but New York is obviously a media, equally a media hub, and potentially, more so when it comes to the written media. And I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how New York plays a part inside cannabis culture, legal New York, or legal cannabis culture.
I mean, the only smacked makes the most sense to me. Housing Works does not make as much sense to me as a name. And then apparently the next dispensary to open is going to be called Union Square Travel Agency. Like, good luck if you're trying to find a dispensary if you're a tourist. Sounds like these names are pretty confusing. So we'll see, New York. I'm like about to give up on y'all, but we'll see.
Yeah, that's the it's interesting. I remember seeing that, the travel agency, and maybe they're going after the playing on, hey, you've been going to bodegas, you've kind of been getting weed from unofficial places, the speakeasy vibe. That might be what they're kind of going for on some of these brand names. That's kind of what I got when I first saw that. Okay, maybe they're trying to like make this kind of an experience. But you're absolutely right. As a marketer, when we look at SEO, having the word cannabis, having the word dispensary in your brand name enables you to list your business on Google as such, and having those keywords in significantly helps you. So kind of going that, hey, we're going to be the speakeasy, if random route is kind of, as you see increased competition and there's 10 dispensaries on the block, if you don't have a brand name that's just set with the consumers, set with the culture, it's going to be difficult to pop up Google. It's going to be difficult. But we'll see how New York's rolling out. Like we said, it is interesting to see the social equity get these licenses. I don't know if you also saw, Curaleaf was Boris Jordan. I don't know if you saw what he was talking about he got, I won't say caught because he was saying it publicly, but it got publicized what he was saying in Twitter Spaces, basically that Curaleaf was he didn't understand basically why these social equity licenses are getting kind of priority in New York when the Curaleaf has invested into medical shops, thinking right when it went legal, they could kind of transfer over. And so he was kind of complaining about how it's unfair that they've invested all this money and helped in the framework, and then they're at a disadvantage now, which is one thing. But then he took it, I don't know if you saw, he took it a step further that basically was like all of the backlash against Curaleaf, like he was saying kind of is racist because he's Russian and people hate Curaleaf because it's that. So it was very interesting. He was getting called out. They were saying you were complaining about social equity not being in your benefit as a rich white man, and then you claim racism like a couple seconds later. And so he was getting kind of tore apart online. I haven't listened to the whole thing, but it was really interesting what old boy was saying, man.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense too that they wouldn't be seen as top notch if they were doing kind of gray area things that whole time. I mean, even if there was like even if there was medical cannabis, personally, I know that Curaleaf had major recalls in New York over the past few months when it came to medical cannabis products being pulled from the shelf for incorrect testing and inflated potency numbers. So it's like, if you're going to go into the market early, do things right. And furthermore, we could talk about Curaleaf for a while. I mean, they just pulled out completely from California and Oregon. So, I mean, yeah, let's give other people a chance, Curaleaf. Because you're not necessarily doing things right. Like I said, if you're going to show up to the market early, you better have a good product and not endanger medical patients with these recalls. I wouldn't want to give them a license either if I was New York.
Yeah, and if you look at, the interesting thing about them pulling out of Oregon, right? They controlled Select. I can't remember if it was they acquired it or were birthed from that. I can't remember the exact history off the top of my head, but Select was the number one selling concentrate and vape cart in the state of Oregon for a while. So to see that a couple years ago, and then pull out completely of the state years later, it's like, to your point, it's like you were not just in the market, you were one of the top performers in said market, and you still got bounced out of the market in a couple short years. So I think they have a couple other things they need to figure out before they get into some of these other markets. And I think it's true to what he's complaining about was, some of these MSOs, them specifically, are trying to buy their way through lobbying and controlling regulations. What we see with Trulieve down in Florida, these companies are looking to enter markets where they can control it at an unfair level. And so it's just funny that that's their whole strategy. And then when you see someone be like, hey, all you big, well-funded people, we're going to give social equity a chance first. That's the poster child for complaining that that's injustice, when he's like traditionally the poster child for the reason that should actually exist. So I find it like a lot of irony, but
right.
I don't know, man. I'm not here to throw stones, Boris, but complaining about racism and and being on the other side of social equity at the same time, not a good look, bro. Not a good look at all. Next up. So with that said, with legalization, obviously, Connecticut just started recreational sales here earlier this month. And we wrote an article just exploring if it's cheaper to buy legal weed in Massachusetts or Connecticut. One of our new writers, Ian, is located in Connecticut, but been buying weed in Massachusetts over the last couple years. Obviously, with Massachusetts being that first recreational state in the Northeast, it was where a lot of people are going to buy cannabis that aren't medical patients. But you're starting to see some of those border states. And so and there's something interesting going on in Massachusetts where there's some price compression right now. There's an oversupply of product. Prices are falling, and businesses are struggling to stay in business. And one of the big parts is the oversupply, but also another angle is all of these border states are now starting to get recreational weed. So you're going to lose actual customers, because in the past you have your entire state's customers, and then these other states starting to drive in, being New York, being Connecticut. And I don't think many people are driving from Maine to Massachusetts for weed. Shout out Maine. But you got some of these border states, and they're starting to get recreational cannabis. So consumers are no longer going to Massachusetts. They're able to get it in their own areas. But it's also looking like, due to prices, cannabis is still cheaper in Massachusetts. So our writer Ian kind of explored various price points, and it seems like we'll still see some people driving to Massachusetts to pick up their legal weed for a little while.
So back to kind of this thing, not to use Curaleaf as too much of an example, but it's kind of interesting to me when you say this, that, I've been hearing so much about Massachusetts, the price is falling, the price is falling. I've actually been hearing that about a lot of new markets who have had recreational cannabis for about a year or two. And what's interesting to me is, whether you're a big company or a small company, you're kind of at the mercy of these prices. So now I don't feel bad for people like Curaleaf, but at the same time I do, because they do get a lot of the blame for driving the price lower and lower. And I think that's kind of I don't think they deserve all of that blame. And I think they are at the mercy of those prices too, especially as cannabis becomes more and more commoditized. Definition of a commodity. I was telling this to Mitch before we went on air. A product is a commodity when all units of a product are identical, regardless of who produces them. At the end of the day, we're dealing with agricultural product, cannabis flower. As more and more states, more and more people start producing this, it is moving towards becoming a commodity. in the eyes of how things are within an economy. So please just keep that in mind, because yeah, more production, it's going to be commoditized, and I think we're seeing that happen, and we just don't get to see that happen in front of our very eyes very often anymore. So it is a little
100%.
disappointing to see.
100%. And I know when we start talking about cannabis as a commodity, a lot of the connoisseurs start to get in their feelings about that. And Danny, we were kind of talking about this again before we went online. When you think of craft or exotic weed, the stuff that people pay a high ticket for, that is a small section of the market. So to them, right, like there's this other quote, I can't remember exactly, but it's like price matters when no other value can be communicated. And so basically meaning, if people see certain value in it, price is not their priority behind their purchasing. And that's for your craft consumer, your consumer that really likes whether it's good weed, good wine, good cigars, sneakers, cars, doesn't fucking matter. People are paying an exorbitant amount for a good, and some other people are shopping at Costco getting the Kirkland brand because they don't give a shit, right? Like there's always going to be those different ends of the spectrum in any consumer good, and it's tend to going to be where the volume, where the masses purchase is going to be more skewed to the more affordable range. Again, that's pretty common across anything. There's much more Toyota Camrys than there are, Bentleys out there. It's just kind of how it is. And so when people get kind of upset, cannabis isn't a commodity, it's always going to be about this and that. I feel that for certain people, but when you look at the majority of weed, and Danny, we were just talking about this before we went live, a $15 eighth in California, you can look at 30 different brands that produce a $15 eighth. Doesn't matter the strain. There's not going to be much differentiation between the look, the smell, and the flavor of all of the weed at that price point. So it is super commoditized already towards the lower end of the spectrum, where a lot of value or a lot of volume is being pushed. And so, like, I think to your point, I don't think that's necessarily going to change, and we're only going to see that further as we get bigger companies that are able to produce larger volumes at a more quality price point. It's only going to get commodified. I don't know if that's a word. Commoditized. Damn, I'm struggling over here. Quicker. But, for people in some of these states, you're getting legal weed. So Connecticut, you guys got legal weed. Anyone out there tapping with us, we want to know what you guys are smoking on. What are the prices you're getting? What's the quality? Is it better than Massachusetts? Are you driving to Massachusetts for weed? Are you driving all the way up to Maine? When I was in Illinois, we learned a lot of people drive over to Michigan to buy product. Even though it's legal in Illinois and Michigan, they didn't cap licenses, so there is so much product available at crazy deals. People are driving to Michigan, buying in bulk at a super deal, driving back home and saving money. So some of these states where weed is significantly cheaper, you're going to still see border states where people go purchase out of their state, even though they have access to weed locally. Next up on our news, we did an interview with Jorge Cervantes, legendary cultivator. We did this at MJ Unpacked in Las Vegas during the summer. We just dropped an article on it. Jorge Cervantes is a pen name for our guy George, man. So he's a cultivator. He's been growing since I don't even know how long this man's been growing. But in the 80s, he started putting out books on cultivating, writing magazine articles. And then he also had VHS tapes, man. He went through the VHS tape range and the era and the DVD era, and now he's making YouTube content, teaching people how to grow at home. And a lot of growers, whether they're growing commercially or home growers, credit this man Jorge as like the source, the inspiration, the plug for cultivating knowledge, just because he was one of the few people. Again, this man was selling VHS tapes during the 80s of how to grow cannabis, back when really the only place you could find that information was in High Times or this guy's VHS tape. So he's kind of ingrained himself on the cultivators and grower side. He's became a friend of ours. Great dude. Interviewed him at MJ Unpacked just about his perspective of watching cannabis go from selling those VHS tapes, having to hide behind a pen name, not show his face, to now being able to travel, be in front of the camera, do YouTube content. And he also isn't just a cultivator from the U.S. This man has spent a lot of time South America, Europe, all over the globe. So he understands cannabis culture on a global scale, something I don't know much about. So it was amazing picking his brain, and just such a joyful individual, to be on the forefront of this industry and watch it unfold, and not be like to be a first mover like that and not be some mega millionaire. Someone might be like, kind of salty, like, dang, this industry moved quickly and I didn't necessarily get my piece. But this dude is just like such a happy-go-lucky dude, and it was an honor to interview him and hang out with him. So you guys can check out that interview. Next up, man, CalGreen Medical. We'll just cover that real quick. CalGreen Medical in Goleta is now carrying the RMR Legacy Smalls. I think they're selling $36 for our 7-gram unit out there in Goleta, man. So if you're out there, check it out. Shout out CalGreen for supporting. Moving on to music content, Macklemore out here. You know, I'm living in the Seattle area. Macklemore's been, if you're a hip hop fan, you know Macklemore out here since 06, 07. And he just dropped a new song with DJ Premier. Macklemore, obviously, at a certain point of his career, went really pop alongside Brian Lewis, and that's when everybody heard, you know, Thrift Shop. He went global. Everyone knows him from that stuff. But if you look at this new record he released, Heroes, he linked up with Budo, a dude who actually was producing a lot of his music back in 06 and 07, and they made a super boom bap hip hop sounding song with DJ Premier on it. I thought it was a dope record. And while Macklemore is a local dude, supported our charity, a great dude, I've been very critical of his music. This joint was a little bit of a jam, man. I was kind of a fan of that. And then we had a comment coming before we move on too much on the music stuff. So comment, would love to hear your thoughts on BDSA market data saying flower sales are dropping by 25%. Is this market correction or black market? Man, I'd say market correction. And I would also challenge that data. Is that looking at 2022 versus 2021? Because if it's by that nature, I think in 2021 we saw just unnatural circumstances. People in 2020 and 2021 were getting stimulus checks. The economy was stocks, real estate, crypto, everything was at a all-time high. Whether you had a little bit of money or a lot of money, everybody was probably, unless you're like in the service industry or live industry, certain sectors, right, were crippled. But outside of that, every other sector was at like literally the best it's ever been in history. So there was so much money out there. There was a lot of free time. And I also will say with lockdowns and restrictions, if you had money, what you could go do was severely limited. There wasn't a lot of movies. So the only thing that you could really spend your money on was, you know, cannabis was one of the few things you could spend your money on. So I think looking at 2020 or 2021 versus 2022, I think you're not looking at a regular market. You're looking at irregular market versus a regular market. So I think that's one thing that needs to be taken into consideration. Sure, we see market correction and price correction, but I think ultimately you're seeing an unnatural market versus a natural market, and it's going to be very difficult to compare those together. I've kind of been saying that for a while. So I don't know. All these articles, the doom and gloom, the market's down, I take all that shit with a grain of salt if we're talking about the last couple of years, man. I'd say we got to look 2019 versus 2022. I'd say that's a much better. I'm curious what's to see that, and I haven't seen a lot of people do that yet.
I 100% agree with you, Mitch. Everything that you touched on, I would totally think is a major contributing factor to that decrease in sales. So totally agree.
Yeah, I don't know. Article, and it's ironic because we write articles, so like I get it. You want to put a headline out that gets engagement, but I think a lot of that shit is just misleading and like, or I see those headlines and I'm immediately like, it's not news. Like, again, we're looking at our irregular market to a regular market, and so I just think like it's apples to oranges. You know, you just can't really compare the two, from my opinion. And then someone else shouted out the town about Macklemore. That was fire. That video was crazy. That video was beautiful, man. I still watch that video from time to time. Super cinematic. Next up on music news, Kid Culture, man. A lot of people probably do not know who Kid Culture is, but he's a producer from Seattle. This kid is like 22, 23. He's produced for Justin Bieber, Corday, Grammy nominated. This dude is made some big records. I can't remember what exact ones he did for Bieber, but you know, even regardless of being a Bieber fan or not, you know this kid's production. But this dude, Kid Culture, he originally got out in the Seattle scene as this cat named Lil D-Rock. He was making beats at like 13, 14. I remember seeing this kid in the studio being like, and I made beats my whole life, and seeing this kid at like 14, like this kid is a fucking monster, man. He's already surpassed what I am as a grown-ass man, barely being a teenager. And then nothing. I didn't really hear nothing. I didn't hear anything. Kid kind of was in this. Kid, no pun intended, was kind of, you know, off the radar for a minute and then started popping up, producing just platinum hits for artists all over the game. And when I uncovered that Kid Culture was this kid, Lil D-Rock, back in the day, I was like, no surprise, this dude was an absolute beast. But he actually stepped on the mic and did his own record, Keep It. So instead of, I thought he was just a producer, but I guess he's an artist. He's done songwriting for Bieber and them. So if people are fans of peak Kanye West, you know, I know Ye is a little touchy subject nowadays, but if you like Kanye West music, especially like Graduation era, those soul samples mixed with the synths over it and still melodic, this record from Kid Culture, Keep It, will satisfy you. I guarantee it. And I know we all are fans of peak Kanye, regardless of Kanye the person. Peak Kanye music, we're all fans of that. So I would check that out. And then, you know, next up, another local thing from Seattle, the homie Taylar, Elizabeth Beth dropped Undercover Lovergirl alongside WD 4D. Dope project. Check that out. Taylor's been putting out some really creative.
That Danny, the whole Google Calendar.
But yeah, so I would definitely check that out. And then finally on the music stuff, we got Rick Astley sues Young Gravy for voice imitation off Never Gonna Give You Up, man, which I think if people don't know Rick Astley, you probably know the culture phenomenon Rickrolled. When someone sends you a video, I might be dating myself, I might be a little old. When someone sends you a video, you gotta check this out, and you click on it, and it's the 80s bop, Never Gonna Give You Up. You know what I'm talking about, Danny? Or am I old now to touch you? You know what I'm talking about?
No, you're not. You're not. No, I totally know exactly what you're talking about. And actually, it's kind of funny because I was recently watching something where they were talking about T-Pain's use of autotune. It was like this new Netflix show where they go really, really in depth about it. So it kind of reminded me of that, where people are a little mad at first, but it's almost like a mad that you didn't do it. You didn't try it first.
Oh man, I remember when the autotune came out and everybody ripping off T-Pain, but now it's like T-Pain doesn't even get his credit anymore. Autotune is just like embedded into music and culture. But yeah, I mean, Young Gravy, I'm not really listening to Young Gravy, you know, like that. But it is interesting. He put out this multi-platinum single, and he definitely, you know, borrowed some vibes from Rick Astley. So I definitely got to check it out a little bit more. So one of the things that was interesting about this case was the producer was able to clear the instrumental of Rick Astley, which Astley does not own, as he didn't make that. So when someone, you know, creates a song, the songwriter royalties are usually split up for who is the writer. And the writer is actually the writer of the lyrics and the writer of the music, the producer of the music, and then there's the performer. So to think of it in the most basic sense, it's split into thirds. There is the writer of the music, there's the writer of the actual lyrics, and then there's the performer of the lyrics. Obviously, it gets much more complex than that when you have like 15 writers and someone writing a saxophone part and performing a saxophone part. But anyways, to think of it in basic points, it's kind of split into thirds. And so Rick Astley does not own the rights to the instrumental Never Gonna Give You Up, which was cleared properly by this artist and the producer. But then on the song, they kind of took some of the lyrics, and it's called interpolation, where you don't necessarily sample it directly, but kind of recreate it, whether it's recreating that vibe or taking those same lyrics and repurposing them. Listen to pretty much any of French Montana's hooks of ever. He pretty much just takes some 80s song and then makes it about selling coke and takes the same melody. It's very popular. But anyways, he kind of copied the voice that Rick Astley does. And this is where copyright's really getting tricky these days, because if you're not taking the actual music, or in this case, they cleared the actual music so they could legally use that, elements of that, but they didn't clear the lyrics. And while they didn't copy the lyrics per se, he did the voice similar to how Rick does the song. And so we're now seeing copyrights where people are saying, you're trying to sound like me, or you're taking my vibe, which is not as cut and dry. If you played the music, the same chords, you can kind of print each of the music sheets and say, oh, this is exactly the same. It's a lot harder to do that saying, oh, you tried to sound like his voice. Or in the case of the Marvin Gaye estate, when they sued Pharrell and Robin Thicke. It was they sued them for taking the groove. The feel was not the same key, was not the same BPM, but or similar BPM, but it was like the groove. It was a landmark case. So, anyways, we're seeing some unique things in copyright. I got to spend some more time with this record. But shout out Rick Astley, never gonna give you up. He was like the butt of the internet, the butt of jokes on the internet for years, and he finally starting to come around and starting to own it. And he's got people jacking his shit, man. So I don't know. Shout out Rick, man. We're still playing that bop. I'm still playing that bop, man. I hear it in Forever 21 in the mall, everywhere, man. People still listening to it. But other than that, man, that's the news that we got today for this morning's morning joint. Unless Danny, you got something you got on your heart, tugging on your heart, you got to let the people know.
I'm actually having some technical difficulties now. So I am perfectly good over here. I don't know what's going on with my computer all of a sudden. So don't mind me, you guys. Hope my week goes a little smoother than what's going on with my computer right now. But you guys all have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining us.
Awesome, man. This is the Morning Joint. We're here every Monday talking about the latest in cannabis and music. And our newsletter should be in your inbox already if you're subscribed. If not, reach out. If you got any stories that you'd like us to cover, curious on our takes on anything, feel free to hit us up, info@respectmyregion.com. Whether it's your company, your brand that that you're interested in getting some information, some news about, or there's just some topics out there that you guys see in the industry you want discussed or want some different perspectives on, love to discuss it on here.